Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Finlo Costain. A new report says that the UK must stop relying on imports and fix diets by doubling the land used to grow fruit and vegetables using nature-friendly farming. I spoke to report co-author Vicky Hurd, the strategic lead for agriculture for the Wildlife Trusts, and I asked her why we need to increase the amount of fruit and veg that we grow in the UK.
It's been important for so long. We eat far too little of our own fruit and veg, and it's so critical for our health. The health impacts of not eating fruit and veg are enormous, in the billions to cost to the National Health Service. But then we could also benefit our environment and our farmers if we were eating more of our own fruit and veg here, because they're high value crops. They take don't take too much land, and they can be part of a really good agroecological system. So many ways it makes sense to grow more fruit and veg.
As well as increasing the amount of fruit and veg, do we also need to change the way that we grow it?
Yes. I mean, there's several ways we need to do this. We want all fruit and veg to be grown in agroecological ways, so minimizing the inputs, the chemicals, because we know that's really bad for nature, which is in crisis in the UK. And it can actually lower the cost for farmers as well if they're changing the way they produce using natural products like natural fertilizer through use of legumes, for instance, in a system, but also using predatory pests for controlling pests and diseases. But it's not easy. Those are big risks for farmers. So we need to have support in that transition for all growers of horticulture crops. But critically, we also need to be thinking about where we're growing the fruit and veg, because in some areas it's doing a lot of damage.
When you're talking about the areas that we grow it in, does that mean integrating more fruit and veg with other crops? And also, we've seen an increase in the use of polytunnels. Is that trend likely to continue?
What we need to see actually is exactly what you say, integrating fruit and veg into farming across the country. So decentralizing, which is what we put in the report, because that would support lots more enterprises, potentially new farmers. Sharecropping is a thing a lot of farmers are talking about, and there's good examples there where farmers are giving land to other new growers. So there's new entrants bringing in creativity and young people into farming, critical, and you can earn quite a lot on a small area with horticulture. But it'll also provide space for nature as well. The more diversified a farmer is, the better it is for nature. But we also need to get some of the intensive horticulture off our lowland peat for very good reasons, because it's an incredible carbon store, it's incredible for nature. And so there's a lot of need to decentralize and increase fruit and veg everywhere. And it's not, a lot of people will think there's big barriers in terms of the climate, the soil, everything. We used to produce fruit and veg everywhere. Let's do it again, but do it well and have the infrastructure to support that, which is what we talk about in the report.
Is it partly about changing people's tastes and
Mm,
attitudes to fruit and
mm,
veg? I mean, for example, we used to grow a lot more gooseberries than we eat at the
mm, yes.
and now we eat a lot of blueberries. So we need to think about the type of fruit and veg that we're eating.
We can produce a lot more blueberries, but it's very difficult to compete with the imports, which are very low cost but are hugely harmful in parts of the world where they've got water stress. We're producing, we're importing a lot. So we can do both. But yes, it is about us having a different attitude and maybe not ever expecting everything like all our apples to be super sweet, and embracing the sour and the rich varieties that we used to have. But we've been led down a path through marketing and through cheap imports to a very small set of varieties of fruit and veg. And also, we've been led into thinking they should look perfect and all be the same size. And though that's creating huge waste problems and huge problems in terms of chemical use. So, it's reinvigorating our attitude to fruit and veg, us eating more, getting more into schools and hospitals, because that's absolutely critical. Children need to be eating far more than they are now for all the very good benefits that can bring. So, yeah, a lot of changing attitudes of the sector and of everybody, all the eaters.
The report specifically calls for farmers to be supported through a shift away from farming on peat. To what extent is fruit and veg reliant on peat? And what's currently happening to change this?
Well, currently about 22% of our vegetables are grown on lowland peat soils. And what we say in the report, we need to have a phased removal of some of that, and particularly also the arable and grassland where possible, because those peat soils are incredibly important for hydrology, for carbon stores, so for climate. The peat soils only make up 2.2% of the land, farmed land, and 29% of our emissions in farming. So it's a critical thing to do to keep that those peat soils and make them wetted. And there's new subsidies to re-wet those peat soils through the SFI. So let's get on and do it and see what crops we can still produce in those systems. And we are doing at the Wildlife Trust lots of tests to look at that with farmers to see what will still be possible, but some won't be possible. So hence we need the decentralization and getting fruit and veg grown everywhere. But it's absolutely critical that we don't reduce our capacity to produce here. And so, do more imports. We need to build up capacity everywhere.
And is there experimentation into alternatives to peat going on?
There are, and it's really, really critical to do that and to fund that. We're asking for the government to fund alternative approaches to wet soils, as we could call them. And we did a wonderful session at Groundswell, which you can now see online, talking to the farmers and the researchers doing that work, looking at how we can produce celery and other crops like biopuff. But that obviously we can't eat that. So we need to put those horticulture, which we can't continue to produce on peat, we need to put it elsewhere and help farmers in that transition.
What about the supply chains themselves for fruit and veg? One retailer recently celebrated a large investment that they were making in British apples, but the investment was into a single very large apple supplier. Do supply chains need to change as well?
Those examples are good, but what we need is a lot more to change, both from the retailer end in terms of better prices, better specifications, so they don't have to be perfect produce, no blemishes, perfect size, but price is absolutely critical, and acknowledgement of the growing risks to those growers from climate change and understanding of that. And that example was good. We give 3 examples in our report of small, medium, and large scale approaches to horticulture. We talk about Gees and what they're trying to do, which is one of our largest producers, but also Riverford and a small scale producer, because they're all doing things. But the critical thing is we need the infrastructure changing. So the bit between the producer, the grower, and the eater. And it needs to be fairer. It needs to be more local, more hubs everywhere so farmers can collate smaller amounts of produce to sell into local markets. And that will take funding and planning changes, planning rules. So there's a lot to be done. And our report covers 7 different areas where we need policy and action.
Is smaller always better, or can these large farms that are primarily producing for supermarkets, can they be good as well?
They can be, and efforts to diversify production on those systems is important. And obviously, if they're using lowland peatland soils, we need to take real care and probably take a lot of that off. Small can be incredibly productive. On a smaller area with horticulture, you can actually maximize use of the sunlight by producing fruit and veg. So it doesn't necessarily have to be lower productivity at all. And using natural systems, as I was saying, to fertilize the soil and combat pests can be really effective.
Would doubling the amount of land that's used for fruit and veg, as you talk about in the report, from 2 to 4%, have any negative impacts on other forms of agriculture?
Well, it's a tiny amount of land, as you say, it's from 2 to 4% of the agricultural land. I think it would boost the trend towards more diversification in farming and give incomes for farmers, which they may be not able to get through current crops, arable, etc. So I think there's real potential there, but it needs investment by government and industry and researchers to see how we can do it best with multi-cropping, intercropping, agroforestry. Big boost area, but that will take time to kick in. But you can get a lot of fruit and nuts from your agroforestry systems, and a lot of farmers are investing in that now. So they need the support and they need the buyers to support that.
And just finally, are there other outcomes that you want to see delivered by a new incoming government?
We want to see more fruit and veg, local fruit and veg, and agroecologically produced fruit and veg in schools, hospitals, care homes, the armed forces. That's most of the parties did say they were going to do something about that. 50% local, 50% agroecological. But that's one thing we'll be pushing hard to see, and more research, as we say, into the kind of fruit and veg that suit across the whole of the country, and support farmers in lowland peat where things need to change. And there's 7 different areas, but overall we need a strategy, and particularly with the land use strategy, to envisage a change and a doubling. So that's absolutely critical. The new government understands that and sets in place a strategy covering both consumption, the supply chain, and production. Needs to be all of it, not just one bit.
That was Vicky Hurt from the Wildlife Trusts. More news as ever on our website 8point9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.